Welcome to History Teller YT. Today, you step into a story that is not buried in dusty archives, but alive in the trembling voices of the Subanen, the people of the river. You may think history means kings, wars, and treaties, but history is also about silence. The silence of rivers that once roared, the silence of forests that once whispered, the silence imposed on indigenous voices. The Subanen, largest indigenous group of the Zamboanga Peninsula, once thrived in fertile valleys. They planted rice where the river fed the soil. They danced on platforms that shook the ground with joy. They honored spirits who lived in trees and stones. But their story, like so many indigenous stories, is not told in classrooms. Instead, it is buried beneath headlines of mining projects, development plans, and conflicts. Today, we call this their present dark age. Not because they lack light, but because systems have conspired to dim it. In this video, you will hear how land was lost, how culture was eroded, how ritual survived, and how courage refuses to die. The hook is simple. If rivers could speak, they would tell this story. Since rivers cannot, the Subanen will, through our telling. Stay, listen, and feel the urgency. History is not just the past. It is happening now, and you are a witness. You might ask, why should we care? Why tell the story of a people living far from your city, far from your daily commute? The answer is this. Their rivers feed our seas. Their forests protect our climate. Their survival ensures the survival of diversity, biological and cultural, that humanity needs. When the Subanen lose their land, the planet loses its lungs. When their rituals vanish, humanity loses knowledge of how to live with rivers rather than against them. Their fight is not only theirs, it is ours. Mining companies that drill their mountains belong to global markets. Climate shifts that erode their slopes come from global emissions. Poverty that haunts their children is tied to policies decided in distant capitals. By telling the Subanen story, we tell the world's story. We face the hard truth that progress, when unexamined, produces casualties. But we also face a brighter truth, that resilience, when shared, produces hope. The Subanen teach us that even in a dark age, seeds of dawn exist, if only we care enough to water them with solidarity. This matters because injustice anywhere weakens justice everywhere. And if rivers are poisoned there, soon seas are poisoned here. To listen is to care. To care is to act. So I invite you to journey with us through this 15-part narrative, 2 hours of history that is not ancient, but unfolding, not distant, but near. You will walk with Subanen mothers who keep seeds in bamboo tubes, with youth who live stream rituals on shaky smartphones, with elders who chant to rivers now clouded with silt. You will hear how laws promised recognition, but delivered delay, how churches offered both conversion and solidarity, how NGOs translated chants into court petitions, how violence tried to silence leaders but failed. Most of all, you will feel the heartbeat of the Buklog, the great ritual dance that shakes the earth with gratitude even in times of grief. History Teller YT is not about entertainment. It is about entering stories that change the way you see the world. And today's story is a call. Stay until the end, not just to know what happened, but to know what can still happen. Because if the Subanen can survive their dark age, perhaps we, too, can survive ours. Let's begin. The word Subanen, Suba for river, Nun for people, carries an entire geography inside it. Currents that braid through valleys, gravel beds where children learn the taste of clean water, sandbars that hold the memory of footpaths older than the first colonial map. To say people of the river is not only to describe a home. It is to announce a relationship, a way of moving, knowing, and becoming in step with seasonal floods and droughts, with a whisper of bamboo and the rumble of storms. Yet across the Zamboanga Peninsula and northern Mindanao, this name has been made to carry a second story, the long echo of displacement. For centuries, the Subanen kept close to the fertile valleys and riverbanks, but push by push, Spanish reductions, American administrative consolidation, post-war resettlement programs, their communities were driven steadily uphill. The mountains took them in, but the river people paid an ecological and spiritual price. Thinner soils, colder mornings, steeper climbs to water sources that once ran at their doorsteps. Today, a new darkness gathers, one that hides in legal footnotes, mining contracts, and the everyday frictions of poverty. It is a present dark age shaped not by the absence of law, but by its frequent betrayal, not by the failure of development rhetoric, but by how often it forgets the river. In this series, we travel with Subanen voices through land loss that erodes kinship, environmental destruction that insults cosmology, cultural erosion that dilutes mother tongue and ritual, poverty that narrows futures, and violence that silences dissent. We ask how a people whose identity is water can endure in an age of drought, political, cultural, and ecological. And we listen for the countercurrent. Community schools that teach in Subanen, Buklog platforms raised from shared labor, councils that stitch together fragile titles and ancestral memory. Darkness is not the end of a river. It is a bend where the current slows and rethinks its path. A warning that the channel needs clearing, that the banks must be defended, that names must be spoken until they flow again. Imagine a map without fences. Its boundaries are sung, not surveyed. Its corners marked by a grandmother's story of a medicinal tree, a basalt boulder where elders held counsel, a river reach where the water always turns the color of tea in the first rains. For the Subanen, ancestral domain has never been an abstract polygon on a cadastral sheet. It is a mesh of wayfinding stories and obligations. The spirits of mountains and rivers are not metaphors. They are civic actors whose consent must be courted through ritual, whose displeasure can be read in the failure of a harvest or the sudden sickness of a child. In a lowland city, paperwork is the grammar of ownership. In upland hamlets, the grammar is reciprocity. If you cut a tree, you plant two. If you fish a pool, you leave some for the next moon. If you walk a path, you repair its stones. This difference in mapping cultures lies at the heart of today's crisis. When resettlement titles were issued from the 1930s to the 1970s, they tended to favor written claims and grid certainty. Oral memory, no less exacting but differently anchored, was treated as nostalgia at best, nuisance at worst. The consequences compound over generations. A line drawn on paper becomes a fence, then a road, then a quarry feasibility study. The old bathing place becomes someone's private farm. A path to a ritual spring requires permission from a new owner who does not share the story of the spring. The Subanen learned to translate their living map into the state's language, as petitions, affidavits, testimonies. Yet in translation, meanings leak away. A sacred ridge becomes resource area. A hill of ancestors becomes mineralized claim. To resist this attrition, some communities train youth to record place names with GPS while elders narrate their layered histories. The point is not to erase the state's map, but to force it to see what it keeps missing. That territory, for river people, is not a surface to be leased, but a set of relationships to be renewed. When we call this moment a present dark age, we do not mean that the Subanen live without light or learning. We mean, rather, that powerful institutions have dimmed the conditions under which Subanen life can flourish, and that this dimming has a history. Decrees that displace settlements, concessions granted without consent, bureaucracies that throttle ancestral domain titles while expediting extraction. Darkness spreads when rivers lose their legal names and become drainage channels, when customary leaders are red tagged for defending forests, when a generation grows up hearing its mother tongue only at home because school punishes what it does not invest in. Dark ages are constructed by 1,000 routine exclusions. A clinic too far away for a fever that cannot wait. A road that connects timber trucks but bypasses a hamlet. An irrigation scheme that privileges a settler valley and leaves the uplands to pray for rain. But dark ages are also named so we can end them. Naming is an alarm. It invites a reckoning with complicities, a tally of what must be repaired. It reminds us that rights codified in laws like the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act were not gifts from above, but winnings from struggle, partial and always at risk of rollback. In the chapters ahead, we will examine 5 fronts where this dimming is most acute: land, environment, culture, poverty, conflict, while threading through each the practices of resilience. Buklog is pedagogy and politics, community paralegals who shadow mining hearings, youth collectives that document rivers with phones and poems, women's herbal knowledge carried like a secret fire. The thesis is simple. The Subanen are not relics of a pre-modern archipelago. They are contemporaries confronting modernity's blind spots, demanding that development remember its debts to the river. A dark age ends when enough people decide to light it from within. One spring restored, one language class funded, one concession revoked, one valley returned to its keepers. Republic Act number 8371, IPRA, was a watershed in 1997, recognizing ancestral domains, creating the NCP, and offering a legal channel for certificates of ancestral domain title, CADT. On paper, it shifted the presumption from prove you own to prove we can take. In many Subanen communities, that promise has stalled in the bottleneck of practice. CADs can take years. Boundary surveys delayed by budget cycles. Petitions routed through offices that move slower than bulldozers. Staff rotations that reset institutional memory just when a case matures. Corruption, subtle and blunt, can creep in. Favor traded for signatures. Hearings scheduled when elders are harvesting. Missing documents discovered after an investor visits. Meanwhile, mining applications and forest land use plans advance on a parallel track with deadlines that, mysteriously, are met. This is the slow violence of paper. No shots fired, but a community's time wasted into despair. The Subanen strategy has been twofold. First, legal literacy. Paralegal workshops in chapel basements. Laminated flowcharts of CEDT steps. Youth trained to read cadastral maps and to accompany elders in hearings. Second, alliance building. Church networks that can amplify a local grievance. NGOs that know how to translate a ritual hill into a protected landscape proposal. Journalists who will sit long enough to understand why a river reach is sacred. Still, the imbalance persists. When consent is required, consultations are sometimes compressed into a single afternoon meeting with snacks and a sign-in sheet. When dissent is voiced, signatures are questioned or divided by inviting friendly leaders to parallel briefings. The letter of IPRA survives. Its teeth chip away. The outcome is familiar. Communities that should be holding titles are instead holding photocopies of correspondence, while their forests hold survey flags for someone else's future. From the 1930s to the 1970s, state policy steered settlers into Mindanao's frontier, distributing homestead titles and cultivating an agricultural ladder out of poverty for many lowland families. For the Subanen, whose land tenure was rooted in customary occupancy and ritual sanction, the homestead regime was a blade that cut silently. Titles granted on lowland alluvium, where Subanen gardens and hamlets had long thrived, converted shared-use zones into private parcels. The state's ledger credited and used land to the settlers' courage, forgetting that what looked and used was a rotation field resting between cycles, a riverside grove set aside for ritual, a floodplain intentionally left open to spare the village on big water days. As roads, schools, and trading posts consolidated settler towns, the Subanen were shepherded into higher slopes. Even when some families obtained papers, the game had changed. Cadastral confidence trumped customary consent. Decades later, these titles outlive their original intent. They anchor claims used by speculators and industrial agriculture, and they complicate today's ancestral domain demarcations by layering private parcels onto customary territories. Repairing this legacy requires more than compensation. It calls for imaginative legal tools, easements that recognize ritual paths, co-management regimes that keep sacred springs in community hands, land swaps that return riparian zones to river people stewardship. Some municipalities have piloted riparian buffers in response to flood risk. Subanen councils argue these buffers should be governed by those whose cosmology already encodes care for the current. Resettlement succeeded in moving people. It failed in recognizing that some people were already there with a different model of belonging. Free, prior, and informed consent, FPC, is often invoked as the procedural backbone of IPRA. But for a people whose agreements are sealed with song, dance, and shared labor, consent is not a checkbox on a government form. It is ceremony. The Buklog itself, built on a great platform that thunders when danced upon, teaches what consent requires. Time to gather kin, a feast to nourish dialogue, a rhythm that synchronizes bodies before decisions bind them. In too many cases, projects that affect Subanen territories rush consent, confusing the mailing of notices with the building of understanding. Prior collapses into a week's notice. Informed is a slideshow heavy with benefits and light on risks. Free is compromised by the presence of armed men outside the hall. Elders, fluent in rivers, are asked to parse environmental impact statements written like labyrinths. When they pause, rightly, to deliberate, they are branded obstructionist or naive. A different practice exists. In a few hopeful pockets, FPIC has been reimagined as a season rather than a session. Information translated into Subanen, cross-site visits to communities living with mines, women-only circles where water questions are debated by those who fetch it, youth forums where dissent can be aired without shaming elders. In these spaces, the result is sometimes consent and sometimes refusal, but always legitimacy. Ceremony, after all, is not mysticism. It is a technology for building social trust. When a state treats FPIC as an audit requirement, it creates paper peace and real conflict. When it treats it as ceremony, slow, inclusive, accountable, it yields decisions that can endure because they have been danced into being. Open pit nickel and gold concessions have a way of aiming for the headwaters, where our bodies sit under forests that tether slopes, where rivers are born. In Zamboanga del Norte and Misamis Occidental, proposed and operating mines encroach on Subanen sacred zones, ridges where offerings keep the mountain spirits in right relation, streams like the Cumularang whose clarity is both ecological fact and ritual requirement. The engineering argument is neat. Or here, roads there, tailings contained in a well-modeled dam, impacts mitigated. The live counterargument is messier and more truthful. A landslide that did not care for models, a turbidity that arrived with the first monsoon after the test pit, a decline in catch that elders swear began when a ridge was blasted. Tailings ponds leak, not always catastrophically, often just enough to turn the river a suspicious color after rain. Silt winks in the sunlight, pretty until it clogs the irrigation weirs downstream. Rituals fall out of calendar when a spring turns sour. The violation is not only chemical, it is ontological. If a river is kin, then dumping waste into it is an assault on a relative. In meetings, mining engineers insist on balance, jobs, roads, corporate social responsibility funds. Subanen farmers ask a question that doesn't fit the spreadsheet. Who pays for a broken relationship with the headwaters? The answer, in practice, has been the community itself. Longer walks to fetch water, new expenses for rice when gardens wash out, children coughing more in the dry season as dust plumes settle on houses. Companies speak of reclamation and closure plans. Elders say the river remembers longer than any contract term. Headwater mines do not simply extract, they extract futures one silted pool at a time. Deforestation is a simple word for a complex unthreading. A hillside log here, a contour line of trees there, and suddenly the wind changes its voice. For the Subanen, forests are pharmacies, archives, and chapels. Barks to cool fevers, resins that seal canoes, vines that sing direction in the understory. When logging, legal or illicit, eats the canopy, sunlight floods places it should only visit, drying streams, confusing birds, inviting grasses that burn too easily, animals that animated stories, the hornbills that choreograph marriage omens, the shy deer that teach patience, retreat beyond hearing. The loss is not sentimental. It is agricultural. Soil thins without leaf litter. Upland rice fails more years than it should. Root crops twist around stones exposed by eroded topsoil. It is medical. Mothers spend longer searching for a certain bitter leaf to bring down a child's temperature, and sometimes they do not find it in time. It is intellectual. Knowledge of where to find a healing bark in the fourth hollow of a certain ridge cannot be taught if the ridge has been cut into a road. In workshops, NGOs sometimes ask elders to list non-timber forest products as if a forest were a supermarket. The elders oblige, then ask the only question that matters. What is the word for the way the forest treats us when we treat it well? There is no English for that, only practice. Prohibitions observed without a police force. Harvests rotated with a sense of enough. A patch left for the spirits who, in truth, are another way of naming the future. When the forest is unthreaded, language frays. And when language frays, the next generation has fewer words with which to defend what remains. In meetings about development, water shows up as a project, a tank, a pipe, a ribbon-cutting photograph. For river people, water is also law. It binds duties and delineates rights older than the Republic. No community that prays at a spring should be made to drink from a tanker, because a company upstream could not keep its silt behind a dam wall. No irrigation scheme designed for lowland investors should starve the upland gardens that stabilize the very slopes that shelter the canal's headworks. To speak of water as law is to insist that clean flow is not a corporate gift, but a constitutional minimum, that the Subanen's relational cosmology dovetails with modern jurisprudence. The right to a healthy ecology, the right to cultural integrity, the right to participate meaningfully in decisions that will color a child's bathwater. In practice, asserting water as law has taken inventive forms. Paralegals file complaints when turbidity spikes. Youth test kits turn river walks into science class. Women's collectives keep diaries of diarrhea, cases correlated with upstream blasting days. Church leaders preach from Ezekiel and from the Buklog's own ethics, tying covenant to catchment. Sometimes these tactics win. Fines levied, silk curtains installed, a permit suspended. Often, they only slow harm. But slowness, too, is strategy. Every delayed expansion is a season in which seedlings can take root, in which a CADT application moves 1 inch forward. The temptation is to accept palliatives, deep well donations, water trucks on fiesta days, because thirst is immediate. The discipline is to keep eyes on the river, not the faucet, and to repeat a hard sentence until it becomes common sense. Water in the Subanen Valley is not a benefit to be negotiated. It is a baseline to be enforced. In Subanen homes, elders still cradle words as carefully as they cradle rice seedlings. Syllables shaped by rivers, inflections marked by ritual pauses. But in schools, the script changes. Filipino and English dominate classrooms, and the mother tongue is often absent except in hurried translations during recess. Officially, the Department of Education has promoted mother tongue-based multilingual education. In practice, Subanen dialects remain low priority. Textbooks are scarce. Teachers are rarely trained to teach in the language. As a result, children begin their schooling already feeling a fracture. What they learn at home is deemed unofficial. What they learn at school is treated as advancement. This fracture deepens with age. In markets and job applications, Filipino and English open doors. Subanen remains the language of jokes, songs, and lullabies, but it risks becoming confined to intimacy, not public power. The consequences ripple. Laws are misunderstood. Mining hearings proceed without meaningful participation. Youth feel ashamed to speak their own words. Elders warn that when a language loses its public role, memory itself falters. How will grandchildren understand a chant if the key metaphor requires knowledge of a vanished verb? Some communities counter this by running weekend language camps, recording folk tales on phones, printing small primers with NGO support. But these efforts, while inspiring, are fragile. The question remains whether a language spoken for centuries beside rivers can still flow into the future if public systems continue to dam it with indifference. The Buklog is not merely a dance. It is a platform of survival. Built from timber and bamboo, it rises on stilts, groaning with the weight of a community that stamps out Thanksgiving through synchronized steps. The sound is thunderous, a heartbeat felt through the soles. UNESCO recognized it as an intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding in 2019, and for good reason. Its survival is imperiled by material scarcity. Timber is harder to source, rituals are costly to host, and by the erosion of ritual specialists, the Balian, whose authority has long been weakened by conversion campaigns. In a Buklog, every participant contributes, men and women, youth and elders. The ritual redistributes wealth, heals tensions, and reaffirms the sacred bond between people and land. But when mining destroys sacred sites, or when communities lack the resources to host a Buklog, the platform stands empty. Without it, the Subanen risk losing not just a ritual, but an entire pedagogy. How to deliberate, how to share, how to remember. Some leaders propose adapting Buklog, simpler forms with modern materials, hybrid ceremonies that weave Christian prayers with ancestral chants. Others insist on full fidelity, fearing dilution. Either way, the Buklog remains a compass, reminding the Subanen that survival is not only about farming and food, but about rhythm and relationship. In the face of cultural erosion, each Buklog performed is both defiance and declaration. We are still here, dancing on the bones of our land. Missionary activity has a long reach in Subanen territories. Catholic priests built chapels. Evangelical groups planted congregations, each offering literacy, relief goods, and new forms of solidarity. These conversions are not simply religious. They reshape political authority. Valian, ritual specialists who mediated between humans and spirits, have lost ground. Where once offerings of betel nut or chicken blood marked covenant with unseen beings, now Sunday services and Bible studies dominate communal calendars. For some families, Christianity offered empowerment, a language to claim dignity in the nation-state, a refuge against stigma, a channel for aid during crises. Yet it also fragmented ritual life. Younger Subanen often see Balian practices as pagan or backward. This dual identity, Christian in worship, Subanen in ancestry, creates tension. Elders lament that certain spirits, once courted for harvest blessings, now feel abandoned. Disasters are interpreted as the wrath of neglected guardians. Others argue that the new faiths can coexist, that Christ and the river spirit may both be honored in different registers. What is clear is that conversion has unsettled traditional authority, creating power vacuums where mining companies and politicians can maneuver more easily. When communities are divided between chapel and ritual ground, it becomes harder to mount united resistance. Yet hybridity also breeds resilience. A Subanen hymn sung in a church choir, laced with metaphors from ancestral chants, carries a quiet rebellion. The question ahead is whether such hybrid forms will sustain memory or erase it. In the contested spirit world, survival means learning to walk both paths without losing sight of the river that birthed them all. To understand Subanen poverty, one must walk the distances. Schools are often an hour's climb, clinics half a day away, markets farther still. Roads snake toward lowland towns, leaving upland CDOs accessible only by motorbike or foot. This geography shapes poverty. Transporting crops is costly. Medical emergencies turn fatal because tricycles cannot cross muddy trails. Children drop out because the walk is too long. For generations, the state has invested in infrastructure where settlers cluster, not where Subanen remain. Poverty, then, is not a natural condition, but a manufactured margin. Land, once fertile along riverbanks, has been lost. Farming on steep slopes yields low harvests and frequent landslides. The irony is stark. Communities displaced to the uplands provide the ecological service of protecting watersheds, yet receive little in return. In fact, they are blamed for deforestation when survival farming forces them to clear marginal plots. Without land titles, they also lack collateral for credit, trapping them in cycles of small harvests and debt to traders. Geography becomes destiny, but only because policy allows it to be. Development, if just, would remap investment toward the uplands. Footbridges for children, mobile clinics for mothers, solar power for hamlets too, remote for grids. Without such reorientation, Subanen poverty will remain a circle, turning on the same wheel of exclusion. In remote Subanen villages, health is often a gamble between endurance and distance. Clinics are scarce. When they exist, medicines run out. Trained doctors seldom stay. Midwives and barangay health workers do their best with minimal resources. Herbal knowledge remains strong. Ginger for colds, guava leaves for wounds, but cannot always address pneumonia, malaria, or complicated births. Malnutrition is common, especially among children. Rice shortages push families to rely on root crops with fewer nutrients. Some relief comes from NGO-led feeding programs, but these are temporary. Maternal health is precarious. Some women deliver at home with no skilled attendant. When complications arise, the trek to the nearest hospital can be lethal. The state's promise of universal health care feels distant when the nearest health card activation center is a day's journey away. Poverty amplifies vulnerability. Families cannot afford medicines, even if available. Yet resilience persists. Women's groups pool money for emergency transport. Youth learn basic first aid. Traditional healers adapt, combining rituals with modern advice when possible. But resilience should not be mistaken for sufficiency. Until the health system bends toward the margins, Subanen lives will continue to end too early, not from fate, but from neglect. Education is often hailed as the ladder out of poverty. For Subanen children, that ladder is missing rungs. Distance, poverty, and discrimination all conspire to keep dropout rates high, especially among girls who are tasked with housework or sibling care. Where schools exist, classrooms are overcrowded, teachers undertrained in multicultural approaches, and materials written in languages students do not fully understand. A child who struggles to read in Filipino or English is quickly labeled slow, even if fluent in Subanen. Such labeling discourages continuation. Secondary schools are farther still, and boarding is costly. For those who persevere, scholarships sometimes open pathways to college, but they are rare. And even with a degree, Subanen youth face discrimination in job markets where surnames and accents reveal their origin. Some return as teachers or NGO workers, committed to serving their communities. Others drift to cities, where they are anonymous but often underemployed. The fragile ladder, then, is both promise and peril. It can lift a few, but it also fractures communities when migration drains youth energy. What is needed is not just access, but culturally grounded education. Schools that teach literacy in Subanen first, curricula that honor local history, classrooms where river stories sit beside algebra. Only then will the ladder stand firm enough to carry more than a few lucky climbers. The Subanen live in zones where armed conflict lingers. The Philippine military conducts operations against the New People's Army, NPA, and sometimes Moro groups cross into Subanen areas. Villages find themselves caught in crossfire, accused by both sides of collaboration. Soldiers suspect Subanen farmers of aiding rebels. Rebels accuse them of siding with the state. Fear becomes daily. Farmers hesitate to tend fields. Parents forbid children from venturing out. Nightfall brings the dread of footsteps on the trail. Military checkpoints disrupt trade, adding costs to transport. At times, food blockades are imposed, starving not rebels, but ordinary families. The landscape itself becomes militarized. Clearings where ambushes might occur, rivers where patrols wash, ridges where gunfire echoes. Living in such spaces corrodes trust between neighbors, between villagers and officials, between communities and their own memories of safety. The Subanen did not choose these wars, yet they pay the heaviest price: hunger, displacement, trauma. When Subanen leaders oppose mining or logging, they risk being red-tagged, accused of sympathizing with insurgents. This label, often baseless, justifies harassment, surveillance, and sometimes assassination. A leader who speaks at a rally may find posters bearing their name as a terrorist supporter. Community organizers live under constant watch, unsure if a knock at night is a friend or a soldier. Red tagging undermines democracy. It silences dissent not through debate, but through fear. For the Subanen, it deepens marginalization. Leaders are deterred from advocating for land rights. Communities lose their voices in negotiations. Younger activists hesitate to step forward. NGOs and church groups try to shield them with publicity, arguing that visibility offers some safety. Yet the danger persists. Red tagging weaponizes suspicion, turning a people's defense of their river into an alleged act of rebellion. It criminalizes survival itself. Violence leaves marks that last beyond the skirmish. Children grow up with nightmares of helicopters overhead. Mothers carry the memory of sons lost to mistaken identity. Fathers cultivate silence as protection. Fear shapes choices. Families avoid planting near contested ridges, even if soils are better there. Youths leave school early to migrate, safer as anonymous laborers than as potential suspects in their own homeland. Trauma becomes inherited. The stories told at night are no longer just of spirits and rivers, but of raids and disappearances. This long tale of fear weakens resistance. A community too scared to gather cannot defend its land. It also breeds determination in some quarters. Widows who organize peace groups, youth who document abuses on phones, elders who insist on keeping rituals alive as a shield of continuity. The shadow of fear is heavy, but even shadows depend on light. The persistence of Subanen resistance is proof that fear, though deep, has not extinguished the fire of dignity. In many Subanen communities, women are not only caregivers, but also archivists of continuity. They keep the seeds, both literally and metaphorically, in bamboo containers hidden under kitchen floors. Women preserve upland rice varieties that have been planted for generations, each with its own name, taste, and ritual requirement. These seeds are more than food. They are cultural contracts. Planting a certain variety signals respect for ancestors, a promise to the spirits of fertility. When mining and logging threaten fields, it is women who quietly smuggle seeds from endangered plots to safer gardens. They remember which leaves soothe fever, which roots cure cough, and which trees should never be cut because they guard a spring. This medicinal knowledge is passed not in formal classrooms, but in the everyday rituals of boiling water, washing wounds, or preparing childbirth decoctions. Oral tradition often rests on mothers' laps, as lullabies double as language instruction and proverbs slip into daily chores. Yet this work is undervalued by outsiders. Development agencies often address men in consultations, ignoring the fact that women carry the maps of food, health, and language in their bodies and voices. Poverty strikes women hardest. When rice runs short, it is mothers who eat less to feed children. But it is also women who organize mutual aid schemes, collecting coins and tin cans to cover emergency transport. In the narrative of Subanen survival, women emerge as both shield and seed, ensuring that even in times of darkness, the promise of continuity is stored safely for the next planting season. Subanen women wield influence not only in fields and kitchens, but increasingly in councils. Traditionally, decision-making was male-dominated, but women exercised informal power by shaping consensus in domestic spaces. If the kitchen says no, the council cannot say yes, goes a local saying. Over the past 2 decades, NGOs and church programs have opened more formal leadership pathways for women. Literacy trainings, cooperatives, and peace-building workshops. Women learn to navigate legal language, to speak in municipal hearings, to represent their barangays in NCP consultations. Their interventions often shift the conversation. Where men may frame issues around territory and production, women emphasize water, children's health, and the future of language. Mining consultations have seen mothers stand up to corporate representatives, refusing offers of scholarships or food packs in exchange for sacred land. Yet leadership is not without resistance. Some male elders dismiss women's voices as secondary. Others fear that women's empowerment undermines tradition. But younger generations increasingly accept women leaders, seeing in them a synthesis of old and new authority. By bridging domestic concerns with political negotiations, Subanen women extend the kitchen into the council hall, ensuring that policies resonate with daily survival. Their leadership demonstrates that resistance is not only fought with machetes or protests, but also with the calm firmness of a mother insisting. The river cannot be sold because it belongs to children yet unborn. Subanen women's leadership is not without cost. Women leaders who oppose destructive projects often face harassment, threats, and in some cases, physical violence. Gender-based intimidation is used deliberately. Smear campaigns portraying women leaders as immoral, whispers that they neglect their families, or rumors linking them romantically to rebels. This form of silencing seeks to exploit patriarchal norms. Yet many women respond with resilience. Some find strength in collective leadership. Groups of women attend hearings together, reducing the risk of being singled out. Others ally with church groups that provide visibility and protection. Stories abound of mothers hiding documents from armed men, of widows continuing the advocacy of slain husbands, of daughters stepping into leadership roles after their mothers are harassed. Violence does leave scars. Some families migrate, unable to withstand the pressure. Others retreat into silence. But many persist, driven by the conviction that defending land is defending life itself. Women's resilience is not romantic heroism. It is the daily courage of choosing to stay, to farm, to raise children, and to speak even when silence would be safer. They embody what anthropologists call everyday resistance, a refusal to vanish, expressed through planting, singing, healing, and occasionally standing at microphones to declare, "We are Subanen." We are not afraid. Subanen youth stand at a difficult crossroads. On one side lies migration, the lure of cities where jobs, however precarious, promise cash incomes and a taste of modernity. On the other side lies rootedness, staying in upland communities to farm, to continue traditions, to fight for ancestral domains. The decision is not merely personal, it is structural. Poverty, lack of schools, and discrimination push many to leave. In cities, they work in construction, domestic service, or as call center staff if lucky enough to have degrees. Some succeed, sending remittances home, but many face alienation, mocked for accents, stereotyped as backward. Meanwhile, those who stay shoulder the weight of continuity. They farm slopes vulnerable to erosion, learn rituals from fading elders, and guard sacred sites. Youth organizations try to bridge this divide. Camps are held where migrants return during fiestas, reconnecting with traditions through storytelling, dances, and river rituals. Some bring urban skills back, photography, social media, paralegal training, to support local advocacy. The tension between migration and rootedness defines the Subanen youth experience. The challenge is how to weave both, to allow young people to explore the world without severing ties to the river. The torch of tomorrow flickers between bus stations and mountain hamlets, needing steady hands to ensure it is not extinguished by neglect. For Subanen youth, language revival has become both necessity and rebellion. While schools often sideline their tongue, some young people reclaim it through digital platforms. Facebook pages, TikTok videos, and YouTube channels now feature Subanen songs, proverbs, and even tutorials. A new wave of musicians blends traditional chants with guitar riffs or hip-hop beats, proving that heritage can evolve without dissolving. Digital literacy becomes cultural weaponry. Smartphones record oral histories, drones map ancestral lands, online petitions amplify local struggles. This digital activism allows youth to bypass mainstream media, which often ignores indigenous issues. Yet access is uneven. Signal is weak in many upland CDOs, gadgets are expensive, and electricity scarce. Still, even limited online presence creates ripples. A viral song in Subanen can spark pride among diaspora members. A live stream protest can draw national attention. The fusion of ancient and digital strategies illustrates that culture is not static. By uploading chants once confined to ritual circles, Subanen youth extend the sound of rivers into the algorithmic currents of the modern world. Their task is delicate: to innovate without eroding meaning, to digitize without trivializing. Success will depend on balancing spectacle with substance, ensuring that the online revival strengthens, not replaces, the embodied rituals of the Buklog. Education is both opportunity and burden for Subanen youth. Those who reach college often become de facto leaders, expected to represent their people in conferences, hearings, and NGOs. They carry the weight of ancestral struggle on young shoulders. Some thrive, weaving academic knowledge with indigenous wisdom to articulate demands in policy spaces. Others feel torn, alienated from both home and city, criticized for forgetting tradition or for being too native in professional circles. Leadership also carries risks. Young activists are not immune from red tagging. A student who documents mining damage may be labeled a rebel sympathizer. A youth leader who organizes a cultural festival may attract unwanted military attention. Despite these challenges, youth continue to mobilize. Student organizations form alliances with environmental groups. Young Subanen lawyers and teachers return to their communities to strengthen advocacy. They embody both hope and exhaustion, knowing that their futures are constrained by forces larger than themselves. Yet they persist, because to abandon the struggle would be to abandon the river itself. In them, the Subanen's fight for survival gains new vocabulary, not just ancestral rights, but climate justice, not just ritual preservation, but digital resistance. They carry the burden of hope, a heavy load, but one they refuse to set down. For Subanen farmers living on mountain slopes, climate change is not an abstract graph. It is a daily gamble. Typhoons bring heavier rains, triggering landslides that sweep away entire gardens in minutes. Slopes once considered safe now collapse unpredictably. A season's labor can vanish overnight, leaving families hungry. Houses of bamboo and nipa, built light to breathe in tropical heat, shatter under stronger winds. Every disaster pushes communities deeper into poverty. Debts rise as families borrow rise from traders. Children drop out to help rebuild. Women skip meals so elders can eat. For outsiders, these are natural disasters. For the Subanen, they are compounded catastrophes. Land loss from resettlement forced them onto fragile slopes. Deforestation removed protective forests, and now climate change delivers the final blow. Survival strategies evolve. Terracing, planting trees, diversify crops. But resources are thin, and government aid often arrives late. For the Subanen, climate change is not a future threat. It is the present apocalypse lived in slow motion, punctuated by sudden violence from the sky. The Subanen worldview holds that rivers, springs, and rains are governed by spirits who must be respected. Climate change disrupts not only ecology, but also spirituality. Rains come at the wrong times. Rituals tied to planting seasons lose their anchor. Springs dry earlier, forcing longer walks for water. Rivers flood unpredictably, damaging fields and homes. Elders interpret these shifts as signs of imbalance between people and spirits. Some communities renew rituals with greater urgency, believing offerings might restore balance. Others see climate change as proof of outsiders' disrespect. Mining, logging, and global emissions disturbing the natural order. The disruption is both material and metaphysical. When rituals fail to bring rain, doubt creeps in. Are the spirits angry, or is the climate simply broken beyond repair? This uncertainty strains belief systems, especially among youth. Yet it also fuels a deeper sense of responsibility. If humans have unbalanced the world, humans must repair it. For the Subanen, climate adaptation is thus not merely technical, but also spiritual. Replanting forests doubles as appeasing spirits, protecting watersheds as covenant renewal. Faced with fragile slopes and disrupted rains, many Subanen communities turn to agroecology, intercropping corn with legumes to restore nitrogen, planting bamboo to stabilize banks, reforesting headwaters with fruit trees that provide both income and shade. These practices are not new. They draw from ancestral techniques adapted to modern challenges. NGOs and church networks support these efforts with training and seedlings, while youth document results for advocacy. Alliances expand beyond indigenous groups. Climate activists in cities highlight Subanen struggles as frontline examples of global warming's injustice. Some Subanen leaders travel to conferences telling audiences that climate change is not just science, but story. Of mothers rebuilding houses each year, of children studying by candlelight after floods. These alliances bring visibility, but the core remains local. The careful tending of slopes, the rebuilding of terraces, the planting of trees whose fruits will ripen decades later. Such patience is a form of defiance. While the world debates emissions targets, the Subanen enact resilience daily, proving that even in a dark age, futures can be planted. Across Mindanao, churches, Catholic, Protestant, and ecumenical, have often stood as shields for vulnerable communities. For the Subanen, these alliances are crucial. Priests and pastors accompany delegations to government hearings, lending a kind of moral armor that deters blatant intimidation. Church-based organizations document abuses, file complaints, and broadcast Subanen voices through newsletters and pastoral letters. In some places, chapels double as sanctuaries when soldiers or company guards threaten leaders. This is not without tension. Christianity itself was a force that displaced Balian authority, and some Subanens still feel ambivalent about church involvement. Yet in moments of crisis, the cross can disarm suspicion in ways the bamboo spear cannot. Priests translate grievances into legal petitions. Nuns run literacy programs that double as political education. When communities organize protests, religious banners amplify their legitimacy. A rally framed as defensive creation gains more sympathy than one framed as anti-mining. The church's reach into national media and international solidarity networks also ensures that Subanen struggles do not remain invisible. This alliance, however, is fragile. It depends on courageous individuals within church hierarchies who are willing to risk harassment themselves. Still, the moral shield they provide has saved lives, slowed projects, and kept alive the conviction that justice is not only a legal claim, but also a sacred duty. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, play another role: translation. They take Subanen stories, told in riverside metaphors, sung in chants, inscribed in oral genealogies, and translate them into the bureaucratic grammar of environmental impact assessments, policy briefs, and court filings. This work is delicate. If translation is too literal, officials dismiss it as folklore. If too technical, it erases the soul of the testimony. Effective NGOs strike a balance. They preserve the cadence of Subanen voices while framing them in terms of rights, ecology, and development. They also provide training, paralegal workshops, financial literacy sessions, mapping exercises. With such skills, communities can challenge mining concessions, demand environmental safeguards, and negotiate with municipalities. But NGOs also face criticism of speaking over communities, of bringing agendas shaped in Manila or abroad. The most successful alliances are those where NGOs act as scaffolding, not replacement, helping Subanen leaders climb higher without taking the platform themselves. Through these partnerships, local grievances become national issues. A polluted spring is reframed as a violation of constitutional rights. A sacred mountain becomes a test case for Indigenous consent. Translation, then, is not only linguistic but political, a way of making sure the river's voice is heard in halls where silence is often profitable. The Subanen struggle does not exist in isolation. It resonates with Lumad movements in other parts of Mindanao, with Igorot campaigns in the Cordillera, with Indigenous peoples across the globe resisting extraction. Alliances extend outward. Solidarity statement from student groups in Manila, policy briefs submitted to the United Nations, petitions circulated in Europe. These connections provide leverage. A mining company embarrassed by international scrutiny may slow operations. A government wary of bad press may respond to complaints it would otherwise ignore. Global NGOs amplify local voices by linking them to broader issues like climate justice, biodiversity conservation, and human rights. Yet such solidarity is double-edged. International attention can provoke backlash, with authorities accusing Subanen leaders of being manipulated by foreigners. The challenge is to cultivate solidarity without surrendering agency. Subanen leaders emphasize that they are not victims needing rescue, but protagonists demanding recognition. Their stories are specific, rooted in rivers, mountains, rituals, but they carry universal resonance, the fight to defend land, culture, and dignity. In this sense, global solidarity is not charity, but kinship across distance, an acknowledgement that in an age of climate crisis, defending the Subanen River is defending the planet's own bloodstream. Once the Balians stood at the center of Subanen life. These ritual specialists mediated between humans and the spirit world, diagnosing illness, blessing fields, and leading ceremonies of passage. Their authority came not from coercion, but from reputation, lineage, and training in chants and offerings. Today, their presence is fading. Conversion to Christianity weakened their influence, branding them as relics of paganism. Younger generations, schooled in modern institutions, often see their rituals as superstition. Mining and deforestation erode the sacred landscapes where rituals should occur. As a result, fewer apprentices step forward, and knowledge is lost with each elder's passing. Yet in times of crisis, sickness, failed harvest, conflict, communities often return to the Balian. Their chants, even if partially forgotten, offer a sense of continuity and hope. Some leaders argue for integration, allowing Balian rituals to coexist with Christian prayers, recognizing that spiritual diversity need not mean conflict. Others fear dilution will erase authenticity. Regardless, the thinning of ritual authority symbolizes the larger crisis, a culture fighting to keep its sacred compass in a fractured world. For the Subanen, landscapes are not inert backdrops, but sacred presences. A ridge may house a guardian spirit, a river a host of beings, a forest a council of ancestors. Mining, logging, and road building desecrate these presences. When a sacred spring is dynamited, it is not only water that is lost, but also a relationship of reciprocity. Communities mourn such losses with ceremonies, but grief often turns into activism, petitions, protests, vigils at threatened sites. The concept of sacred landscape complicates mainstream development discourse. For outsiders, mountains are our bodies, rivers are resources, forests are timber stocks. For the Subanen, they are kin. This difference makes negotiations fraught. How does one compensate for the death of a relative? Cash offers or scholarships cannot replace a violated covenant. Yet by insisting on the sacredness of landscapes, the Subanen offer a counter-narrative to commodification. They remind the wider society that development without reverence leads to ruin, not only cultural, but ecological. In defending sacred landscapes, the Subanen defend a worldview where life is networked, where harm to one part of creation destabilizes the whole. Despite erosion, rituals persist. The Buklog continues to be performed in some communities, sometimes adapted to modern realities. Healing ceremonies, though less frequent, are revived during epidemics. Funerary rites still invoke ancestral songs, even if shortened. New forms also emerge, prayers that blend Christian hymns with Subanen chants. Environmental rituals staged during protests, youth reenacting dances for cultural festivals. These adaptations show resilience. Rituals are not fossils, but living practices capable of reimagining themselves. For the Subanen, ritual is not only about communication with spirits, but also about social cohesion. Gathering to sing, dance, or sacrifice reaffirms identity in the face of external pressures. Even when rituals are shortened or simplified, their performance signals continuity. Some youth film these events, sharing them online to inspire pride. Others compose new songs in Subanen, connecting ancestral motifs to contemporary struggles. In this way, ritual becomes both preservation and innovation, a bridge between past and future, an anchor in turbulent times. The Subanen are not alone. In northern Luzon, the Igorot peoples fought against dams and mining, invoking their ancestral domain rights. Books like Gerard Finnan's The Making of the Igorot show how cultural consciousness was forged through decades of resistance. The Igorot mobilized rituals, community councils, and alliances with NGOs, eventually gaining recognition of their territories. Their experience offers both inspiration and caution for the Subanen. Inspiration because it shows that indigenous peoples can transform marginalization into political power. Caution because success came after decades of sacrifice, with many lives lost. The Igorot's use of regional autonomy movements also contrasts with the Subanen's more fragmented resistance. Comparative struggles thus provide a mirror, suggesting strategies, regional solidarity, legal campaigns, cultural festivals, that the Subanen might adapt to their own context. Beyond the Philippines, indigenous peoples worldwide face similar dark ages. From the Amazon to the Arctic, communities struggle against mining, oil extraction, and deforestation. They too fight for language survival, cultural preservation, and climate justice. International forums like the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues create spaces where such struggles converge. Subanen leaders who join these gatherings return with renewed courage, realizing they are part of a global movement, not isolated victims. Comparative exposure strengthens advocacy. The Subanen can frame their fight not as parochial, but as part of humanity's collective defense of biodiversity and cultural diversity. Yet global alliances must be navigated carefully to avoid dependency. True solidarity is reciprocal. The Subanen contribute their voice, their stories of rivers and rituals, enriching global discourses on sustainability. Beyond the Philippines, indigenous peoples worldwide face similar dark ages. From the Amazon to the Arctic, communities struggle against mining, oil extraction, and deforestation. They too fight for language survival, cultural preservation, and climate justice. International forums like the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues create spaces where such struggles converge. Subanen leaders who join these gatherings return with renewed courage, realizing they are part of a global movement, not isolated victims. Comparative exposure strengthens advocacy. The Subanen can frame their fight not as parochial, but as part of humanity's collective defense of biodiversity and cultural diversity. Yet global alliances must be navigated carefully to avoid dependency. True solidarity is reciprocal. The Subanen contribute their voice, their stories of rivers and rituals, enriching global discourses on sustainability. Comparative struggles highlight a shared horizon. Justice that respects indigenous sovereignty, protects the environment, and recenters culture. For the Subanen, this horizon is not utopia, but necessity. Without it, displacement will continue, rivers will be poisoned, languages will vanish. With it, survival becomes possible, not only for them, but for the broader society that depends on watersheds and forests. Justice here is multidimensional. Legal recognition of ancestral lands, ecological restoration, cultural revitalization, economic inclusion. Comparative lessons show that victories are incremental, often fragile, but real. They also reveal that solidarity is essential. No community can face global extractive forces alone. The Subanen's future, therefore, is braided with the futures of other indigenous peoples and of the planet itself. To walk toward this shared horizon is to declare that the river people's survival is not just their own fight, but the fight of all who drink water, breathe air, and dream of dignity. When Republic Act 8371, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, IPRA, was passed in 1997, it was hailed as a landmark. For the first time, Philippine law recognized that indigenous peoples have rights to their ancestral domains, independent of the colonial era doctrines that had long erased them. For the Subanen, this law seemed like the long-awaited key to reclaiming rivers, valleys, and ridges lost through resettlement and mining concessions. The centerpiece was the Certificate of Ancestral Domain Title, CADT, a document that would secure collective land ownership. Yet decades later, many Subanen communities still wait. The process of securing CATs is riddled with bureaucratic hurdles, boundary surveys that stall for lack of funds, hearings delayed indefinitely, documents lost in government offices. Meanwhile, mining companies obtain permits in months. Some Subanen leaders whisper of corruption, of envelopes exchanged to keep ancestral titles buried under red tape. The danger is not only delay, but also division. Rival groups are sometimes encouraged to file competing claims, fracturing solidarity. Still, communities persist. They gather oral testimonies, create hand-drawn maps of rivers and ridges, and send delegations to city offices even when travel is costly. For them, the CADT is not just paper. It is a shield against erasure, a way to ensure that children can inherit not only stories but also land. But the paradox remains, a law meant to empower is also the site of disempowerment, reminding the Subanen that recognition in the state's eyes often requires a struggle as arduous as defending a ridge from a bulldozer. The Subanen have long practiced their own forms of governance. Councils of elders mediate disputes, rituals seal agreements, and consensus is reached through slow, deliberate dialogue. Authority is persuasive, not coercive. Leaders earn respect through wisdom, generosity, and ritual competence. This system is relational, ensuring that decisions align with the community's spiritual and ecological obligations. Yet the state imposes another framework: barangay captains, municipal councils, national agencies. These structures operate through elections, party politics, and bureaucratic regulations. The clash between custom and state governance creates tensions. A Subanen elder may rule against a project after ritual divination, only for a barangay resolution to approve it because of political alliances. Some Subanen leaders have entered formal politics, trying to bridge the two worlds. Success is mixed. While some manage to channel resources to their communities, others are co-opted by patronage systems, weakening their legitimacy. The challenge is to harmonize governance systems without erasing either. Some municipalities experiment with hybrid councils where elders and elected officials deliberate together. Others explore ordinances that recognize customary law in resolving disputes. The path is difficult but necessary. Without such harmonization, Subanen governance risks being sidelined as cultural, while state governance monopolizes legal authority, leaving the river people stranded between their own traditions and external rules. Legal victories for indigenous peoples are rare, but they exist. Courts have occasionally ruled in favor of ancestral domain claims, and some mining projects have been suspended due to lack of genuine consent. Yet the Subanen know too well the adage, justice delayed is justice denied. Cases can drag on for years, long enough for forests to be cut, rivers poisoned, and communities displaced. Faced with this reality, many Subanen reinvent justice outside the courtroom. They conduct rituals of healing for lands scarred by mining, asserting that spiritual repair is as vital as legal redress. They establish community protocols that require outsiders to seek permission before entering their territory, even if the state does not enforce it. They organize people's courts in barangays where customary law settles disputes faster than distant judges. This reinvention does not replace the need for formal justice, but it demonstrates resilience. By exercising justice in their own ways, the Subanen affirm sovereignty even in the face of neglect. Their message is clear. The law may be slow, but their dignity cannot wait. In this persistence lies hope that someday state justice will align with ancestral justice, not as a favor, but as a long overdue recognition. Every time a Subanen child greets an elder in their mother tongue, resistance takes place. Language is not only communication, but also worldview, carrying metaphors tied to rivers, mountains, and spirits. The decline of Subanen fluency among youth is therefore seen as a cultural emergency. To respond, community leaders, NGOs, and teachers have begun initiatives for revival. Storytelling nights are organized, where elders recount epics and proverbs. Local radio programs broadcast in Subanen dialects, reaching even distant CDOs. In some schools, pilot projects introduce Subanen alphabets and primers. Digital tools also play a role. Mobile apps record folk songs, while youth post Subanen poetry online. The revival is not nostalgic. It is political. Speaking Subanen in public spaces asserts identity against assimilation, challenges stereotypes of backwardness, and reminds others that this people has not disappeared. Some compare it to planting a forest. Each word spoken is a seed, each story told a tree. Reviving language is thus both a cultural renaissance and a shield, ensuring that when the Subanen negotiate land, protest mining, or celebrate rituals, they do so in a tongue that carries their ancestors' authority. Among the many Subanen rituals, the Buklog stands tallest, literally. Its platform, built from timber and bamboo, rises above the ground, trembling when danced upon. Recognized by UNESCO as heritage in urgent need of safeguarding, it embodies the Subanen worldview. Community cooperation, thanksgiving to spirits, affirmation of social bonds. Reviving the Buklog requires immense effort, gathering resources, training ritual leaders, organizing feasts. Yet when it is performed, it recharges the cultural heartbeat of the people. Youth see in it a spectacle of pride. Elders find continuity. Outsiders witness a culture alive, not dying. Some adaptations have emerged. Communities use alternative materials when timber is scarce or integrate modern instruments with traditional chants. While purists worry about dilution, others argue that adaptability ensures survival. The Buklog is more than ritual. It is governance, pedagogy, and resistance rolled into one. In an age of cultural erosion, every Buklog is a renaissance, declaring that the Subanen remain people of the river who can still stamp their rhythm onto the earth. Memory is both weapon and healing balm for the Subanen. Elders recount stories of displacement, of rivers poisoned, of sacred ridges dynamited, not to paralyze youth with grief, but to remind them what is at stake. Oral histories, genealogies, and myths weave a tapestry of identity that resists erasure. At the same time, memory heals. Storytelling circles allow trauma to be voiced. Children of conflict victims hear their parents' pain contextualized in a longer struggle. Songs of mourning become collective catharsis, turning grief into solidarity. The act of remembering thus becomes political. Forgetting would mean surrender, while remembering affirms presence. Cultural Renaissance projects often center on memory, recording chants, writing down epics, archiving photographs of rituals. These are not mere museum pieces, but living archives used in protests, schools, and community rituals. The Subanen show that memory can fight as fiercely as any weapon, ensuring that their dark age does not erase their story, but instead becomes part of a narrative of resilience and rebirth. The phrase present dark age captures pain, but also signals agency. By naming their suffering, the Subanen reject silence. Yet they refuse to stop at naming. They also dream. Their vision is a future where rivers run clear, where schools teach in Subanen, where Buklog platforms rise again, and where ancestral titles secure the land for generations. Dreaming is itself resistance. It asserts that despite poverty, conflict, and marginalization, the Subanen refuse erasure. They dream not of returning to an untouched past, but of shaping a dignified modernity rooted in rivers. In this dream, development exists, but on their terms. Ecotourism that respects sacred sites, schools powered by solar energy, cooperatives that market Subanen coffee and crafts. Such visions prove that the Subanen do not reject progress. They reject progress that destroys. The Subanen cannot realize this future alone. Solidarity is essential. Between Subanen communities fragmented by geography and politics, between indigenous peoples across Mindanao, between civil society and global allies. Solidarity requires humility. Outsiders must listen, not dictate. NGOs must support, not dominate. Churches must accompany, not control. It also requires courage to stand with Subanen leaders when they are red tagged, to amplify their voices in national debates, to challenge policies that privilege corporations over communities. Solidarity is not charity, but justice. A recognition that defending Subanen rivers is defending humanity's ecological future. The challenge is immense, but every alliance forged. Every student who learns Subanen songs, every journalist who reports fairly, every policymaker who defends IPRA's spirit, brings the horizon closer. Dark ages are not eternal. History shows they end when enough light is gathered. Candles in houses, torches in protests, words in courtrooms, songs in rituals. For the Subanen, dawn will come when their ancestral lands are secured, when their rituals are practiced without fear, when their children speak Subanen proudly in schools, when violence no longer shadows their valleys. This dawn is not abstract. It is built daily, in the planting of trees, in the telling of stories, in the courage to say no to destructive projects, in the resilience to say yes to life. The Subanen remind us that rivers, though dammed, find ways to flow. Their struggle is not just survival, but a declaration that they, the people of the river, will continue to exist, resist, and flourish. In this declaration lies hope, not only for the Subanen, but for a world desperately needing to remember that justice, like water, must flow to all. You have now traveled with us across centuries of displacement and decades of struggle. You have seen how the Subanen lost fertile valleys to settlers and corporations, how they were driven into fragile slopes, how their forests were cut, their rivers poisoned, their rituals silenced. You have heard about the poverty that traps them, the conflicts that endanger them, the red tagging that seeks to erase their leaders. And yet, you have also seen the fire of resilience. Women storing seeds like treasures, youth turning TikTok into a classroom for endangered language, elders rebuilding Buklog platforms against all odds. History here is not just tragedy. It is courage written in small acts repeated daily. The Subanen remind us that darkness is never total, that rivers, though dammed, find new paths. What you heard is not folklore, it is testimony, and testimony demands response. To listen without acting is to let rivers dry in our conscience. The moral of this story is not hidden. It is as clear as water when unpolluted. Land is not just property, it is life. Culture is not just performance, it is identity. Justice delayed is not justice. It is dispossession in slow motion. The Subanen teach us that resilience is built not in palaces, but in kitchens, farms, rituals, and classrooms. They show us that to defend rivers is to defend children. To speak one's language is to resist erasure. To dance is to declare survival. Their dark age exposes the dangers of greed, but their persistence offers a lesson for all of us. That dignity cannot be mined, that memory cannot be logged, that spirit cannot be red tagged. We too live in times of crisis, climate change, inequality, loss of meaning. The Subanen story tells us that survival is possible when we anchor ourselves in community, culture, and courage. That is the moral. Darkness can be endured, even ended, when enough people choose to keep the fire burning. As we close, I invite you not to end the journey here. Share this story, carry its lessons, and return to History Teller YT for more histories that challenge and inspire. Each episode we bring is not just content. It is a bridge between you and lives often ignored. Today, you walked with the Subanen. Tomorrow, you may walk with other forgotten peoples whose struggles mirror our own. Subscribe, stay connected, and join a community that believes history is not dead. It is alive, urgent, and necessary. Come back, because together we can keep rivers remembered, cultures respected, and futures reclaimed. Until then, let us carry the Subanen's words as our own. People of the river, flowing, resisting, enduring. Thank you for listening. May we meet again in the next story.